is 8:09. We've had the Honorable Judge Joe Brown on. He's doing the Q&A. And we have some people waiting. I'm going to ask if your questions can be limited to 90 seconds or less.
And
And
I'll stop being
Judge,
so long-winded.
no, Judge, you're fine. You're fine. I just want to, I just see like four hands standing up, and I know Alexis have been waiting for quite a while, and we appreciate her patience.
And then
And
Diop is
so
after that.
right, and Judge Joe, you can speak as long as you want because this it's just knowledge and information pouring out. So we appreciate that definitely, and thank you for the questions, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, and so it'd be Alexis, Diop, Nas, and then Leon.
All right, thank you so much, Alexis. You unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Roz. Hi, Logic. Thanks for the space. Thanks for bringing me up.
Peace.
Hello, Judge. How are you?
Hello, ma'am.
Hi. You mentioned earlier prosecutorial discretion. I'm sorry about that. Let me mute that. You mentioned earlier prosecutorial discretion, and I think many people don't understand fully what that is. I think you did a great job of explaining it. But would you also take some time to explain the importance of having Black prosecutors and what positive role they can play in our community?
Okay. Yes. I have noticed that very few areas have effective Black prosecutorial authority. We have to assign priority to those offices that we get interested in. And one of the ones that we ought to be most interested in is the district attorney's office. The other thing to reinforce that is we need to, where you can elect these judges, to be very cognizant of the backgrounds of the judges we vote for. The third thing we have to do is quit trying to get out of jury duty. Right now, one of the most frequent questions I get from acquaintances is, Judge, how do I get out from doing jury service? I ain't telling you because you keep talking about justice is just us. Well, keep your ass down there, your behind down there and deliver some justice. Next thing is in areas where we vote for judges, we don't pay any attention to them, but there's one category of official that does deal with our day-to-day existence, whether we get divorced, whether we have to pay child support, how much, whether we get thrown out on the streets, whether we get locked up, whether we get bond, whether or not justice is served, whether due process is delivered. Those are judges. But we have this situation where people show up for election day voting or early voting and they get a handout sample ballot from somebody that got lots of money to put people's pictures or names on these ballots and they vote for them. Around here, we had a guy, and I'll call his name. He's dead now. He was a ridiculous mess. His name was Joe McCarty. And Joe McCarty had been Grand Dragon of the KKK and chairman of the White Citizens Council. And every time that SOB ran for judge, he got the black bloc vote because he paid some of the black politicians to put him on their sample ballots. We have right now in this county, which is the fifth largest criminal jurisdiction in America, and it's the largest predominantly black area around. And we've got out of 10 top level criminal court judges that are on for a re-election this election cycle. We've got 5 of them that are young racist prosecutors that got the black bloc vote because they got on somebody's sample ballot, and that's a disgrace and a shame. Now, we have to take control of our situations. We've got a few who stand out around the country in terms of notoriety, but they are not delivering on their mandates. So we have to make sure that does not happen. We have to look out and be aware of those times when we get lots of black folk being paid to run against somebody who really ought to be in the office so they can knock the person out of the box or put somebody who is typical old line country club justice racist in, or somebody who's got another agenda besides blackness or even fundamental fairness. Now, that said, I hope that responsive to the question.
Yes, Your Honor. It was perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Glad to have been of service, my dear.
Thank you, Alexis. Next we have I think Logic said Nas or Leon. I'm sorry, I forgot which one.
Diop, Nas, then Leon.
Oh, okay, okay. Diop, Nas, then Leon. Thank you.
All right. Unmute.
Oh, is that for me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, hello. How you doing today, Judge? I wanted to say thank you very much. First off, for commenting on some of my things on my page and whatnot. Um, I'm a service connected vet who doesn't have so much as a parking ticket. I just had my children's case just moved from here, the Arizona Supreme Court, where they said no. So it's a number of issues that I wanted to share some information on, and also like ask some questions for the judge. So one of the biggest things that I keep hearing is the argument of black. Like, why can't we just crush that and just go to the dictionary and the documentation, which says black is African American and African American is Negro. And if you're a Negro, I don't have the case law in front of me right at this moment, but it says that a Negro is nothing, has no, means nothing, is trash. The Black's Law Dictionary also states that black is silvorter mortius, which means dead in the eyes of the law. And then there's also Supreme Court case law saying that all of the courts are judicially bound to know this. So why are we still allowing ourselves to be called black, Negro, and African American when these titles strip us of our sovereignty and our rights? Right? That's covered also in Article 6 of the Constitution, where it says the Constitution is the absolute law of the land and nothing can supersede the Constitution. It also says in pursuance of any treaties, right? So the most important treaty that we
Well,
have as a nation is Friendship and Peace of 1786, and no one even mentions treaties or the Constitution.
that was with a Native American nation. That one. And what you're talking about is the supreme law of the land consists of the Constitution, one, two, such laws as passed by Congress to effectuate the Constitution, and three, such treaties as have been ratified by the Senate. That was in 1789 when that was ratified. The Bill of Rights, which a lot of people think of, was not ratified till 1791, so they don't mention that. But you're right on that. However, uh, there's a long history behind how the term Negro came about. It's when Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh, with Queen Elizabeth's mark as legitimate pirates, so to speak, they were raiding the Spanish galleons and seizing those that had cargoes of what the Spanish termed were Negroes, who had been enslaved and were being brought over to the New World. Well, they pirated them and sold them at low discounts in various Spanish colonies, and they would say, "We have a cargo of Negroes for cheap." So when they started bringing them to Virginia, midway through the 16th century, what happens is they said we had cargoes of Negroes using the Spanish or Hispanic term. That's how that started, and then it went up, and down. Now, in my lifetime, it's been colored, Negro, black, Afro American, black, then African American, and then back to black. So I kind of think it's what we choose to call ourselves. So, there is a thing about racial identity in this country. And even if it is not genetically based, uh, it's got some basis in appearance. Uh, there is a fact that the average white person in America who's been here, particularly of English background, has somewhere between 18 and about 24% recent African ancestry. And the African American usually has somewhere around 25, 28% white ancestry or Caucasian. We get things confused, like what is a Caucasian? People think white. No, some Caucasians are white, but there are other distinctions. Like Kamala Harris, though she purports to be a negress, an African American, actually, according to her father, whom I've actually met, has no recent African ancestry, and though she's swarthy, she qualifies anthropologically as an Aryan. That's the same one the Nazis lied about and claimed to be blonde haired, blue eyed, but actually they're swarthy, dark haired, dark eyed, and they're classified as Caucasians. So are the dark skinned Australian Aboriginals classified as Caucasians, and a few others too. So we have to get into the facts, the political and social realities, and the fact that humans not serve, but suffer from a thing called xenophobia, which is fear, revulsion, or distaste for the unknown or the unfamiliar. And that's been with us for a long, long time. And the only cure around that is when the unfamiliar has become quite familiar and there's something else that's more unfamiliar than that which used to be the strange. So I could go on at some length explaining that, but no, we are stuck with the political and social and cultural realities of blackness, Afro Americanness, African Americanness, Negro-ness, or coloredness, because there is a cultural aspect to it. And we haven't gotten away from that by a long shot, because black culture, African American culture, on balance, is not the same for the most part as Caucasian, white, European, Euro American culture on balance, though there are some distinct similarities, particularly when the economic thing gets leavened out. A great deal of what we look at is not really a race thing, it's an economic thing, and it's a class thing based on your economics and educational status. See, we forget that even the Europeans put on the level of the upper class or caste the educated elite, along with the military elite, along with the landed elite, and along with the industrialist elite, and along with those who are investment elites. So we have to do something about improving our status. And the takeaway is, if you didn't, tell your children, make your grandchildren, nieces and nephews, stepchildren, or whatever they may be, deep into kindergarten through 12th grade, so they can get what they need to unlock all the doors they'll face the rest of their lives, even if they have to kick in a few. That said, that's my response.
Thank you, Judge Joe Brown.
All right.
Next, yes, sir. I wanted to now I think it's Nas and then Leon. So Nas, can you unmute, sir? You got like
Yeah,
90
um,
seconds, sir.
yeah. I wanted to let Leon go before me because he was in line before me, and I don't want to cut him.
Leon, then Nas. My apologies.
Okay.
That's nice of you.
Thank you, Nas. Good evening, hosts and co-hosts. Thank you for doing the space. Uh, and thank you, honorable judge, for coming on this space. Longtime fan. My parents were a fan of yours when you had your show, and you very no nonsense. And they used to tell me you listen to that Judge Joe Brown because he's no nonsense, and you never want to meet him in front of you in the court. That's when I was a young boy. That's when I was a young boy because I was a young misguided. But now I'm a little bit older, somewhat wiser. But I'm I'm gonna cut to the chase. What is your take on Joe Biden's Supreme Court pick of Ketanji Brown Jackson? Um, we've
Well,
a lot of us been. Oh, go ahead.
a
I'm sorry.
judge I know, a black judge, the first black federal judge in recent times in his state, is very much opposed to her and suggests that he make another black woman his choice, but it's too late. I know some black women who are in a position to be nominated, I think would be very good choices. But let me say this: we don't need anybody who has not given an absolute commitment to not only furthering justice and equity, but furthering the interest of her people. And we used to have a saying back when that the older I get, the more truthful I see it to be. We had a type of Negro, colored somebody, I hate to use the term black somebody, who was always talking about they were waiting until they got in a position to do something for the race and they didn't want to spoil their chances of getting there. The truth of the matter is if that's your attitude, by the time you get to this mystical place where you can do something, you're too damn old, too set in your ways, and too damn used to yielding to a fear of doing what you know you ought to do. Now, typically, I'll be just blunt about it. From where I am, my generation tended to pick names, African names, for somebody that was born to them when they were deep up in the upper middle class status, who got raised with not so much a comprehension of their ethnic circumstances and perhaps with loyalty to the ethnic group installed in them, but the exact opposite inputted into them. And they grow up and typically they get spouses. I'm not saying that disqualifies you because you got a non-race member spouse, but that's typical. And they serve as ideal neutered people who basically have no identity other than a convenient identity with the race that is looking to them for help, assistance, and fundamental fairness. I called attention to a type that spoke to me, and I'll tell you where this was. I spoke at the Black Bar Association banquet in Minneapolis, St. Paul, some about 10 years ago. And this clown was saying, I wish we had kept Dick Cheney and brought him back. I said, you black and you wanted Dick Cheney? And then another one came up to me and said, JR, I don't want to talk to him. And JR, who was Jewish, head of this firm, said, Tommy, go talk to the judge. There's no shame in supporting your people. We always support Jewish causes. Why can't you support your own? Well, Tommy, JR, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Tommy, go talk to the judge. He's trying to help you and your people out. You see, they are that kind, and that's how they get where they are so they can get nominated. And like Thurgood Marshall, who was known as Mr. Baseball Bat, when he was coming up, because he always liked to have a Louisville Slugger in case he had to warm some head, or he always requested a 12-gauge shotgun and some buckshot when he made these appearances around the country to litigate civil rights matters and give adequate criminal defense to black defendants who were getting railroaded. He said when he was retiring, and they asked him if he knew who his replacement was going to be in terms of the nomination. Yeah, I know who it's going to be, but I'm not at liberty to say. So wait a minute. Before I get off that, let me say one thing. A black snake will bite you just as quick as a white one. So right now, we don't need a blackface justice, so that would help if the blackface justice sisters, yeah, she'll shot at this thing. But we need, if we get a black female justice, we need somebody who is into liberty, justice, equity, and the Bill of Rights, and somebody that would reinforce them instead of forgetting about them to push a feminist LGBTQ cult agenda over the agenda of the nuclear family, manhood, womanhood, childhood, and fundamental fairness, equity, and justice. Now, that said, that's my comment. I've never heard of this woman doing anything for the cause, and at this point, it's too late to expect anything.
Thank you, Judge, for your opinion. Appreciate it.
All right, that's my opinion.
Nas, thank you, Leon. Nas, you're up next, sir.
Thanks. And Logic and Roz, thanks for having the space. Judge Joe Brown, thank you for your time, and thank everybody for being here. I'm going to just pick one thing that always surprises me, not surprising me, but I'm always amazed whenever Judge Joe Brown talks, he'll say something that none of us had ever heard because like you were there. So when I was writing questions down, man, at first I was like, should I ask him about Biden? Should I ask him about MLK? And I was going to ask about Johnny Cochran, but I think to say that for a private time. But I will ask about MLK only because he was under surveillance, I think, from 1963 to 1968. You mentioned that, I guess, an FBI memorandum. I know that the FBI recordings and surveillance of Dr. King are sealed until 2027. And there's some black bootlick, I forget who it was, who's trying to destroy them because they don't want to embarrass Dr. King, which I don't trust his motivation. So the memorandum you're talking about, is that part of the surveillance or is that part of...
That's a copy of that that's required under the Freedom of Information Act is in fact supposed to be in the record of the case. And what it was is J. Edgar Hoover personally ordered all audio and visual surveillance of King to be shut down for the 48 hours, 2 days preceding when he was assassinated, and the 2 days afterwards. That was the order. It set that particular day. It was 48 hours before, 48 hours after, but after he was assassinated, while we whoopee. So, yeah, that's very suspicious because, as you say, he had been under auditory and visual surveillance for a long time. By the way, there's another little unfortunate thing, too, that's coming to light. J. Edgar Hoover was qualified to be considered a black man. And if you see young pictures of him, he looks like, say, Harold Ford Jr. or a young Adam Clayton Powell. And we think of him as a liver-spotted old white man with a lot of distorted features. But J. Edgar had a profound hatred of the Klan, and that apparently flows from the fact that the Klan at one time ran his family out of Louisiana for trying to pass as white. So we are sometimes our own worst enemies. And by the way, the Mann Act that we saw come up recently in the prosecution of a black music celebrity, R. Kelly, was a creature of Congress back before World War I who was upset at Jack Johnson having a white wife. He was the black world heavyweight champion. And he had a lot of white women that hung around with him. So the FBI was created in order to find something to prosecute Jack Johnson for. And as a result of what they came up with, they devoted themselves and achieved the Mann Act. And how Jack Johnson got arrested and prosecuted is he was on a train going to a seaport where he and his white wife were going to go to Europe. And because Georgia did not recognize interracial marriage at the time, after this 15-minute train trip, at the next stop, Jack Johnson was arrested by federal agents. And he was prosecuted and convicted. He escaped to France, where he was living until his mother begged him to come back so she could see him one last time. Frankly, as a parent, I think that was low down, and I would never do that to any children of mine. But he got apprehended, and he wound up serving his sentence. He got out and got killed in a car wreck in 1946. Of course, our black/colored president, Barack Obama, refused to pardon Jack Johnson, but Trump did. I mean, it's symbolic, but you have to understand Jack Johnson had the stature with my parents and grandparents that, say, Muhammad Ali did with my generation or some of the subsequent generations. So there is that. That's a little extra history in there.
Thanks, Judge. And I just want to clarify something. You said that the FBI memorandum on MLK you got that from a Freedom of Information Act connected to the case?
Yeah, it was connected to the case. See, what happens is James Earl Ray filed several attacks on his conviction. The first one, that it was unprecedented in Tennessee law for it not to be granted, was this: if there's a pending motion for new trial before a judge and the judge dies before the motion for new trial can be held, there is an automatic grant of a new trial. Judge Preston Battle, who was a fitness freak, suddenly turned up, found under his desk, died of a heart attack the day after he concluded taking Ray's plea. 2 days after, he had a motion for new trial on his desk, and for the first and only time in Tennessee history, it was not granted. So other than that, there were the following factors. Ray never confessed to killing King, and he entered what's known as an Alford plea, A-L-F-O-R-D, under the precedent of Alford versus North Carolina, which is a moderately old U.S. Supreme Court case that stands for this proposition. A pristinely innocent defendant can be allowed and will be allowed to plead guilty if he perceives it to be in his best interest to do so, and he enters that plea of guilty freely, voluntarily, understandingly, knowingly, advisedly, and intelligently, and this is the big key, and the state has a reasonable factual basis upon which to proceed otherwise. In other words, independent of the plea of guilty, the state could proceed theoretically on a prosecution with other evidence. Well, essentially, the only evidence that the state was relying upon was James Earl Ray's rifle, and that rifle was ballistically excluded from being a murder weapon. So that's what Ray was going under. So in the many times he had been back to court attacking this through what we called in Tennessee a post-conviction relief proceeding, these various things had been filed. And there was at one time in the early 90s down in Washington, D.C. on 14th Street, the repository for the records relative to assassinations and assassination reviews, where you could go to the front desk, fill out the request form for what you wanted or the category of things, pay your fee, and you'd get a certified copy of those documents, which were very interesting. That was set up by an act of Congress in the late 1980s, effectuated by an executive order by President George Herbert Walker Bush, and then by President Bill Clinton. So it made very interesting reading when you got a hold of these memoranda. And in fact, one of the most telling ones was one wherein this exchange went on. The director is desirous of knowing how long it would take to prepare a sufficient and detailed ballistic report on the ballistic matters pertaining to the King killing. And the answer came back, and then the next memoranda that came back said the director is ordering that a sample report be prepared by day after tomorrow. Please see agent so-and-so for details. And then day after tomorrow, sure enough, the draft ballistics result report came up, and they hadn't even conducted the test at that point. So it was all fake.
Wow.
And there you have it. So America relied upon the FBI, who were the culprits involved in the killing of King. It wasn't Raul, any of these clowns, organized crime, etc., because at that point there had been mafia snitches, and cranks are always talking their heads off the first time they get scared. So all they had to do was have some senior FBI agent come in from D.C., pay a visit to some of the snipers who had had multiple tours in the NOM, which was going hot and heavy in those days. The FBI got 5 XM-21s transferred to them from the Defense Department late December 1967. I have the serial numbers, and I've had them copied and put in multiple secure locations to be secured after I die. when I finished this book. And then in late April, when the Defense Department demanded the return of these 5 rifles, since the FBI had no use for them, they were required to do an inventory, and they were only able to return 4 of them. I have the serial numbers for the 4 they returned, and the missing serial number is the one that was the murder weapon. So you tell me how in the hell the FBI loses an experimental sniper rifle in their system in 4 months. They made 62 of them with an extra barrel. The Army Marksmanship Unit and basically sub-assembled them and distributed some to the Marine Sniper School in Quantico. The FBI apparently got wind of them, examined them, and requested 5, and they got 5 diverted temporarily to the FBI along with 5,000 rounds of special hand-loaded ammunition, which is consistent with what they pulled out of King's body.
Whew, thank you, Judge. Whew, thank you.
By
Great
the way,
information.
the rifle King was supposedly shot with, Ray's rifle, had a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 10 inches, and the bullet they pull out of King's body had a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 11 1/4 inches, which required a custom gunsmith to make the barrel of whatever they shot King with, or simply, since the Army Sniper Unit had manufactured 63 barrels of stainless steel to fit the M14s with this very rate of rifling twist.
Wow. Now, for those of us who understand firearms, that's a totally different firearm. That's not it's no way you can have a 1.5 versus an 11 11, 1 and
11
11
and a half
inches.
versus
Yeah.
10. What that
Right.
means is the bullet makes 1 complete revolution every 10 inches or every 11 1/4 inches.
Correct, because of the
Or
stippling.
11 and 12.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I never did reveal that. I had the rifle retested to get the sample bullets and scanning electron microscopy done. So basically, they blew the bullets up to the size of a house so you could walk around literally and take a look at it. And striations didn't match from the sample bullets what they pulled out of King's body. And in fact, the FBI took another dive so they would not be able to get the striations. They falsely claimed that the base of the bullet, which they stripped into 3 separate parts, was incapable of analysis, but under scanning electron microscopy, it was perfectly clear. Well, yeah, it was bogus. You could analyze the stuff well, but to keep it from being done, they shot their sample bullets into a pile of cut up legal pads, which are made out of cardboard and heavy paper, so it would strip the striations off. The other point was that we did a metallurgical analysis, or one had been done, and the metallurgical analysis of the lead contained in the bullet pulled out of King's body exactly matches the metallurgical analysis of the bullets that the FBI got fired upon invoice in late December 19 of any known commercial ammunition at that time.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that, Judge. Ryan has a question. Ryan, thank you for your patience. You got 90 seconds. Please pose your question to the Honorable Judge Joe Brown.
Thank you, Ross, so much. I appreciate Judge Brown being here today. I'll be real quick. I came up to talk about what you were saying about juries because I completely agree with you.
I'm sorry, Ryan. Can you come a little bit closer to your phone? I don't know if it's like you got the
Okay.
earbuds on.
Is that any better?
Little
Is
bit.
that any better?
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you. I'll be real quick. So Frederick Douglass told us a man's rights lies in the ballot box and the jury box and the cartridge box. So since we already talked about juries and voting, I'm wondering what your thoughts on black gun ownership is, and do you think we're going the wrong way when we're supporting repeals of the Second Amendment? Thank you.
I think black folk would be damn fools if they disarmed. Now, the fastest arming segment in the American population, fortunately, for the last couple of years, has been the African American contingent. Interestingly enough, they're featuring black men with their children on the front of gun magazines. They're featuring black people. For instance, Colin Noir is being prominently featured by the number one selling manufacturer in America, Ruger, advertising one of its 9mm pistols for concealed carry. And for the last 3 months, every ad they've had has got him in there. So we're beginning to be recognized, and the conservative white interests are recognizing a commonality of circumstance between black folk, particularly considering the rampant violent crime that exists in our community. Now, the facts are, from the crime stats and what we get through official channels, is that the more honest citizens who are armed in an area, the lower the violent crime rates in those areas. But you see, there is this same group that's been pushing for gun control that is descended from gun control that was delivered to keep blacks from being armed. There's an interesting pre-World War II Florida Supreme Court case where they busted this white guy for carrying a pistol. And one of the Florida Supreme Court justices was flat out candid. He said, I don't see what the problem is. This law was never intended to be applied to white people. It was just to keep the Negroes from arming themselves to resist what we know should be their circumstances. So there you have it. And
Yes,
there's
sir. Yes,
another
sir.
thing, too. You don't disarm the warrior because the slave might cut himself on the sharp spear.
Thank you, Judge Joe Brown, for saying that. And I mean, most people that listen, they know my stance on the 2A, and it just doesn't make sense for, if you're a law-abiding citizen, to not be able to defend yourself and your family, especially in a highly volatile community or area. You better be able to defend yourself and your family. So I appreciate you saying that, sir.
Let me tell
Yeah,
you one of the
Next,
things where I
yes,
don't
sir.
like Barack Obama, because he reminds me too much of people I knew back in the 60s who were pimping the movement. But let me tell you what really turned me off to him. There was a 90-some-year-old woman who had been married to an actual working cowboy. She lived in the project, Caprini Green,
Capri Green.
Capri Green,
Cabrini Green in Chicago.
Chicago.
Yeah.
And he had left her his old single action Colt. It had 5 live rounds in it. And some jackass thugs tried to break in her apartment, and they were going to kill her. And one of them was threatening to rape her after they robbed her. So she shot him to death and wounded 2 more of them, and they fled. Well, she was prosecuted for having an unlawful pistol in Chicago. Now, the Illinois state legislature introduced a private act to exonerate this old woman. The only person in the entirety of the Illinois state legislature that voted against that was Barack Obama. And I developed an intense dislike for him that I've harbored ever since. That was just plain wrong. But you see, that's the situation. And I know we've got a lot of stuff going on right now about black men can't do that. Only white people can exercise self-defense. That's a lie. I have been in this business for 50 some years. I was a prosecutor, a defense lawyer. I got the youngest person in the world off death row. Spent $50,000 of my own money to do that. I've been a criminal court judge, and I have represented black folk accused of killing white folk and gotten them acquitted. And I've had black folk accused of killing white folk, even white cop in one instance, in my courtroom, and they got acquitted. So that's a lie. All it takes is a good lawyer, a fair judge, and black folk who don't try to squirm out of jury service, and you'll get justice. And the other thing I'd make an observation is learn the bloody doggone rules. The Constitution of the United States of America takes about 15 minutes for a high school grad to read. And half of it doesn't even apply anymore because it was just procedural to set things up, and it self-abrogated somewhere in the first decade of the 19th century, 215 or 16 years ago. So get on it. Learn the rules. Don't complain about the game is slanted if you don't even know the rules to the game. At least learn that, and then you can start pointing out where it really does have deficiencies. Anyway.
Indeed. Thank you, Judge Joe Brown. Next up, we have Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you for your patience, sir. You have 90 seconds to pose your question.
Yes, indeed. Greetings to the host, co-host. Thank you for having this space. Judge, appreciate for all you do for the community and all you have been doing. I have a quick question. Is surrounded by reparations, and you guys may have discussed this. So if you have, you can just hit bullet points. I'll go back and listen to the recording. The HR 40 bill, to me, it doesn't seem real thorough. It seems very broad. So my question is, do you think we should support it, amend it, or just do away with it? And that's my question.
What they have right now is not really a bill for reparations. It is a bill to create a commission to study reparations. If you will remember, about 2.5 years ago, there was a big uproar where Congress did this thing in the House where they had all these hearings about reparations, but they weren't on reparations. It was should we or should we not study reparations. Now, I'm mad about that because 2 weeks later, with absolutely no fanfare, without debate, passed on the first voice vote in the House and Senate was something they had the nerve to style the Gay Reparations Act. It was about insurance benefits to an open-ended $58 million for gay couples who had been denied insurance coverage as though they were in a spousal relationship. So it was the first allotment was 58 million, but it's open-ended, and they styled it the Gay Reparations Act. That was, I think, absolutely insulting to watch these bozo the clown folk on the Black Caucus posture and carry on just for something that could have been done quietly, which was simply, let's study reparations and see what it's all about. Now, reparations is interesting. January 16th, 1865, General William Tecumseh Sherman, head of the military district in the deepest South, ordered that every black man who had been freed could present himself for presentation of 40 acres of confiscated rebel land and one army mule. And it worked out fine. Ulysses Grant, his commanding officer, approved it. Abraham Lincoln approved it. And Congress, which was Republican, House and Senate, funded it. It started being operated under the Freedmen's Bureau. It was a great success until the Democratic vice president Lincoln had selected for purposes of reconciliation Johnson, who was from the state of Tennessee. He, since the South was still in a state of non-reconciliation at the time, as commander-in-chief, issued a military order rescinding Sherman's 40 acres and a mule award. So we had reparations at one time, and I used to joke. I said I sure as hell would like to have the interest compounded semi-annually at a reasonable rate on 40 acres and one goddamn mule. But anyway, that's a little bit on reparations, and it's nothing new. It comes up about every 35, 30 years. So they're talking about what happened in 1980. Well, let's not forget a little less than 30 years, 15 years, 1965, 66, 67, they were talking about reparations. They were talking about reparations in the 50s and the 30s, and everybody was talking about it's time we got our 40 acres and a mule. So remember, no president can sign off and award reparations. It has to be an Appropriations and Enablement Act by Congress. That's House and Senate. It has to be signed off on by the president, or if he doesn't sign it or he vetoes it, it has to be overridden by Congress, 2/3. And it has to survive the Supreme Court, and it has to have survived the attack by any and sundry of the 50 states. So, yeah, we've got a long way to go, but I think I'd like a little reparations, even if it's not enough to do more than take an extended vacation or hell, buy a new car.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Appreciate your answer.
Okay.
And
Thank you, Judge. Go ahead, Logic. Go ahead.
oh yeah, outstanding, Judge. And you just, I just like to stay right there. You mentioned some very important things. I'm living in Savannah right now, and I've been to the historical site where General Sherman issued that Special Field Order 15 to those freedmen pastors uh, on that great historical day. But that it reminds me of and makes me think of a lot of work we're doing now about the freedmen as a political unit and how the freedmen in their status, coming out of a slave status into a freedman status, and how they were able to get things done politically, specifically for that group coming out of slavery as freedmen. We got the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, even though we know what happened with that. We had the Freedmen Inquiry Commissions, the Freedmen Preservation Societies. We had the 1866 Civil Rights Bill was almost what basically was a product of what happened after the Civil War and what was going on with the freedmen being transitioned into citizenship of supposed to be full citizenship in America. And you have a long list of congressional commitments and government promises to this specific group, and a lot of our families are tied in generationally to those political groups of freedmen. And so when we look at the failed commitments to that group and we talk about reparations, I've been articulating the significance of the freedmen political status and moving as a political unit rooted in the freedmen plight. And do you think the freedmen plight and the failed commitments to the freedmen and the freedmen as a political group is relevant today?
It could be. But the problem is how would you get into court to do it? See, there's a thing called sovereign immunity. You cannot sue a governmental entity, local, state, or federal, unless it gives permission or it's in one of those rare categories that somebody's state or federal Supreme Court has said establish an inherent right to sue. One of the other problems is that some of what is going on involves prior deliberate and intentional acts, but the people that were responsible are long dead. So who would you sue? And how would you get standing to sue? Again, it resolves itself to a matter of it would have to be a congressional appropriation and enablement act. We have a problem with that. And if it is not done in a couple of decades, it was going to be increasingly difficult to prove status to collect reparations. And also because we keep thinking of it in terms of white folk doing us wrong. But in 20, 25 years, white people will no longer be the largest group in the country. It will be the Hispanics who will probably say, go get lost. We didn't have anything to do with that. We are going to use our status to advance our own interest. It looks like there will be no majority race or ethnic group in this country in about 20, 25 years. So we need to start setting up some alliances or doing something right now to get some effective people in place of our very, shall we say, House Negro sellout bunch known as the Black Caucus. And we need some folk that will actually do something besides just some shouting and carrying on for something that looks good on the caption, but in the body has absolutely nothing to do with anything. And I'm referring to this latest bunch of garbage about we need to have a bill passed so we can study reparations. Nobody said any damn thing about awarding them or what form they would take. And then I'm looking and halfway laughing tragically at how many of us are going to talk about, I ain't taking no DNA test. That's because them folk trying to set us up for some kind of genetic experiment so they can cause us to be infertile. You know, I can see that coming too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate that because we definitely been echoing a lot of the same things you've been saying, specifically about the difficulties of trying to get it done through the judiciary, and how, you know, reparations is an invoice that must specifically go to United States Congress for the reasons that you know, you've articulated quite perfectly here in this space. And I thank you for that. And you know, even when you said that, historically that has always been true. Even when it was done then, you know, you had you know, the Congressional Committee of Freedmen Affairs, you know, chaired by the Honorable Joseph Ramey. And so it's definitely, even when we research some of the judicial decisions on reparations, they said that it, you know, invokes, or it requires a political, it begs a political question, suggesting that, you know, it would take like an act of Congress to get something like that done. And with the influx of immigration, which is another issue, which is another good question on how you feel about the present immigration policy in this country, being that with mass immigration, you know, specifically from 1990 to 2000, which is the largest influx in my research. We had over 11.5 million immigrants just on the legal side come in, and over 10 or close to 10 million every decade after that, and how that impacts our political effectiveness in this country. So, what do you think about, you know, how immigration, legal and illegal, affects our people and our ability to attain progress and political power in this country? And that's my last question.
Okay. Article 1 of the Constitution says every 10 years there shall be a census, and based on the census, representation in the House of Representatives shall be apportioned. California, Illinois, and New York lost congressional, House representation. They want to build that back up, but they want it to be composed of people who can't vote. I, at my age, have participated in at least 5 census episodes as an adult, and this is the first time, the only time, this is the first time I have not been asked my citizenship status. Now, why is that? That's so that California can have an enhanced body of people assigned to live there who will be counted, but whether or not those people would actually be able to vote would be disregarded. You look at New York, and it is leading the way in allowing non citizens to vote, even illegals to vote. So we get this thing about making it easier to vote. And all across the country, getting set up to vote and voting is a lot easier than getting your driver's license or getting it renewed if you have to go down to DMV. So, what kind of system do we have where you say it's too hard to get qualified to vote when it is easier to qualify and get registered to vote than it is to get a driver's license? And I am unable to escape the conclusion that that's hooked up with this same scam they're doing about trying to not count, to count people who can't even vote in determining representation. It's hooked up with allowing aliens and illegal ones to vote in local elections, and it's hooked up with a scheme to get more people who otherwise would find it difficult because of their alien status to register to vote, and also because the population dynamic has changed. In 25 years, there will no longer be an ethnic majority in the United States, and white people won't even be the largest ethnic minority. So I see an effort to, one, save their bacon, if that's what it is. But I suspect it's not so much that, it's if they rely upon stuff like take your booties to the pole, where 1/3 of the naked dancers or the bare butt dancers on the pole were in fact boys, not girls. And they're trying to appeal to the mindless set who would uh, respond to a bare butt getting shaken rather than issues. It sounds to me like somebody's trying to set up a left-wing control, and then we've got this new thing about the new catchword for fascism, which is disinformation. We have got it verified that this is not the truth, and those are trying to spread disinformation. That's bull, because that's just telling a lie to set up, using the catchwords, a propagandistic lie to appeal to those who don't think deeply and are well subject to being led and directed. I see this as a ploy so that they can further disrupt the nuclear family, manhood, womanhood, childhood, and decency. See, 55 years ago, all across America, along with the anti-war thing, there was this bit where men are somehow evil, and the evils of mankind are brought about by masculinity. So you had the lesbian crowd that hated men, the feminist crowd that hated that they weren't men, the gay crowd that didn't like it that they were not full men. And then you had this bunch that was going along that was saying war is a man thing, so therefore change the way boys are raised to men so they will be emotional and let their feelings come out rather than being so uptight under self-control and holding it in until it produces war, you know. So they got control of the entertainment industry that was going belly up at that time because Hollywood movie studios were folding in the face of color TV. They took over these up and coming executive slots. They decided to bail Hollywood out by, instead of having two movies that changed every Thursday and Sunday, uh, 50 cents, walk in whenever you wanted to. You saw the two movies, two or three cartoons, and side feature, to having a setup where you paid $1.25 to $1.50. You had to go in on time, leave on time, and it would last as long as people would keep going in numbers. And they found the black exploitation movie, which instead of doing it so black folk would be inspired to do the right thing, go to college, get a job, or be responsible family members, or heroically about the business of making things better, they appealed to the lowest common denominator and started glorifying dysfunction. The pimp, hoe, drug dealer, robber, thief, gangster, burglar, con man, and that's what we got. Superfly, Black Caesar, and this kind of nonsense that has poisoned things all the way down to now. So we ideate and glorify dysfunction instead of what we ought to be doing. Be all you can be is not a good slogan. It ought to be all you ought to be and should be, because you can be a damn fool. So there's a lot going on that we have to swing around, because as Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, said, the absolute lie, the absolute enemy of the truth, the absolute enemy of the lie is the truth. And if the lie can be convincing if it's told long enough and loud enough, the truth is even more effective if it is told long and loud. We must suppress it at all costs. So I think
thank you
the
for
group
that,
assembly
Judge.
today
Wow.
is into suppressing the lie.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Appreciate that. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Nahi,
Okay,
you got a question?
go ahead, Logic. Go ahead.
I
Yeah,
just wanted to see. Naheem came up real quick. I think he had a quick question, and we get back to the regular rotation.
indeed, indeed. Let me know if y'all could hear me. I think my
We
audio
can
is
hear you.
sounding
We can hear you
okay. Okay,
fine.
perfect. Okay, you know, Judge Joe Brown, you were speaking about our numbers in relation to the numbers of Hispanics who will, according to, well, we conducted an interview where some numbers were brought up that said Hispanics will double our population in 30 years, and Asian Americans in that same time span will surpass our numbers, right? So one of the
Yes.
strategies that we're promoting, we have several names for. I personally call it the Black South strategy. My brother Josh, who's in our organization, our treasurer, he calls it the closed fist strategy. And that strategy is we're trying to urge our people to move back into at least 9 southern states, 5 that we stress the most, so that we could have a political demographic majority in states. I'll just name a few like Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. And we believe because 66% of our people are still in the South, 44% of our people are spread out all over the country. If we could just get half of our people back in these states, that we can have political majorities in these states, to whereas we can take control over state houses, we can run our own governors and put our own house reps, and more importantly, our own senators, excuse me, in the U.S. Senate. What are your thoughts on such a strategy?
That's why I'm running for mayor of Memphis in 2023, because Memphis was always the gateway to the South.
Mm.
It's at the nexus of the main continental thoroughfare, which is I-40, goes down an ancient valley that the Native Americans used to use, and it crosses the main continental riverway, which is the Mississippi River. So it is the distribution center. It could be expanded into the point of entry for eastern seaborne traffic coming directly to Memphis. So Memphis is in a position to become the mecca, literally, for a revitalized South that is predominantly black or controlled by these interests. Now, the insidious thing about the Hispanic population is not them as a person. It's just if you filled out a federal form, buy a handgun or firearm or anything like that, or a bank application, the first box is Hispanic, non-Hispanic. And if you check Hispanic, it doesn't make any difference for the ethnic classification whether you go to the second box and you check Caucasian, Black or African American,
That's right.
Native American, Pacific Islander, all this other stuff. All of these other groups, if you identify with the Spanish language, you are Hispanic. So they've got white, black, brown, red, yellow. Now, my stepmother was Filipino. He's slant-eyed Asian, but she's qualified or classified as Hispanic because she's from the Philippines and they spoke habla español. You see where that goes? Okay, I know people that are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, but they're from Puerto Rico and they speak Spanish. I've got a tailor I had for 30 years. She's from Argentina. She looks like she's German, which is her ancestry, but she's classified as Hispanic. I've got a friend who is a comedian. She's a beautiful sister. She's a nice paper bag brown, but she's got 13 brothers and sisters, and they range from African dark to white looking, and they got the same mom and dad, but they're all Hispanic, you see. So everybody in that group, whether you come from Pacific, Philippines, or other islands controlled by the old Spanish Empire at one time, or you're coming from Puerto Rico, you're coming from South America, you're coming from Central America, you're coming from Mexico, and see in Mexico you have this mestizos, mulattos, and all of the rest of them, the Spanish or the Hispania, and all of them are classified as Mexican, but all Espanol, all Hispanic. And you get this artificial construct that I'm looking at like, okay, that's not really an ethnic group. That's like saying all people that speak English are one ethnic group, but you divide all the English speakers down into various stuff: Italian extraction, Irish, Scotch Irish, English, French, German, Scandinavian, African American, Native American, whatever you do. But for this group, you lump all of these racial groups or predominantly or reflecting as a predominant characteristic certain salient elements of various racial groups under one ethnic group denoted by language. So you see, that's not exactly, well, to use the term, kosher. Oh, another thing they're doing, they're offering African Americans, black folk, an out. If you turn gay and go LGBTQ, you can apply to a new ethnic group. Now, see, the groups that are protected under Title VII, for example, race, color, national origin, sex, age, medical condition, and religion. See, all of them but religion are conditions, status conditions you can't change. The religious one is a product of mama taking baby girl, baby son, boy to school when they're still in to church when they're still in diapers. So we get, let's say, acculturated to religions to the point where we can't question them by the time we get grown. So LGBTQ is trying to have trannies in public libraries talk 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, read to them so they get inculcated with this LGBTQ cult, and then teach it in schools, kindergarten through 6th, and then 11th, 12th grade. So by the time the kid gets grown, he becomes a person who has a secular religion / LGBTQ, and he can't help himself any more than somebody raised a Catholic, a Methodist, a Baptist, an Episcopalian, a Presbyterian can, or a Muslim, or as a Jew, or a Buddhist, or somebody who is a Zen practitioner, or somebody who is a Hindu. So they're trying to make a secular religion so they can get into what they're doing. But just like you can't teach a religion in school, you shouldn't be able to teach a sexual cult in school either. The same rules should apply. But they're trying to offer black folk an opportunity to cop out of this struggle, because if you are male and you are a functioning man, and that some gay folk function that way, I'm talking about the cult, not just what they do privately in their bedroom, but a way of life that LGBTQ pushes, including pedophilia and this tranny mess to try and cop out from the responsibilities of being a man. Well, you can opt out. You can become a sexual object rather than somebody that is an opponent mano y mano, to use Espanol. That's it? All right. That's my tentative
Wow.
response to that.
Oh,
Wow.
definitely. Thank you. But let me just say thank you, man. That was great. And as the president of the United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen, I just want to let you know that you embody everything that it is to be a freedman, the spirit and the fight of our ancestors and the things that we had to endure just to make sure that we are living today. I hear it in your spirit, and from now on, I'm viewing you as an honorary member of our organization because you
Let me
embody
say this.
that spirit.
Let me say this. My grandfather was born a free man, and he is jet African black. His father was a Yoruba district sub-chieftain who got kidnapped and brought over to America in 1812 after the slave trade was over. they freed him, but they breed late in my family. So my grandfather was born in 1850. So when the Civil War was over, he was 15 years old. Now, he told me some interesting stories, and part of this whole thing I'm getting from the horse's mouth. In other words, my grandfather told me he wrote up a journal that I got when I was 33 years old, delivered to me by his old lawyer. And I read that extensively. So he was telling me what it was like in slave times, like our habit of wearing a baseball cap with the bill to the back and to the side. I did that when I was a kid, and he knocked the baseball cap off of my head. He said, I don't ever want to see you do that. You know why? Because back in his day, a freedman could wear those engineer caps with the bill straight ahead like a white man. Slaves had to wear their engineer caps to the side or to the back so the slave catchers or the slave patrols could go over and see if they had papers. See, little stuff like that we don't pay attention to.
Indeed. Thank you, man. Thank you again, Judge.
All right. Thank you, Naeem. I wanted to just say real clear to set the room, set the space. This is BTP2. What BTP is, by the people media, which is us. And also we're working in conjunction with our brothers by the Be the Power. So that is what BTP2 is. That's when we work together. Usually, like Logic and I have done 2A space on firearms. We did that. I mean, it wasn't a space, it was a podcast. And we're here tonight with the Honorable Judge Joe Brown. I'm letting people get their questions in, and we're getting all this knowledge. I'm sure you've been enjoying it. Sister Sean, you're up next, sis.